Ketchum.
Hey guys, PokeDan here. The Pokemon anime has been a staple to the Pokemon franchise for over 20 years. And during its runtime, we've seen the protagonist Ash Ketchum gain so many travelling companions. These travelling companions have had all stories of their own and captured their own Pokemon. And in fact, that's the topic I'll be focusing on in this video. Today, you guys join me in ranking every Pokemon owned by Ash Ketchum's companions or friends. I've included every character who officially travelled with Ash, and I found the information for this video from Bulbapedia, which will be linked down below. Remember guys, the ranking is just in my opinion, so feel free to leave yours down in the comment section. But with all that being said, let's get started with the video. To start off, we have 4 Pokemon who tie for last place, and they are Lana's Eevee, Iris's Gible, Brock's Comfey, and Silent's Basculin. And these Pokemon are last simply because I've not seen any full episodes with them in, so I can hardly put them at a high spot without seeing much of an appearance from them. Up next, we have 2 Pokemon owned by Misty, being Catherine the Love Disc and Azurill. These Pokemon are so low because they only appeared for a short amount of time, and I think that given more airtime, these Pokemon would have been very memorable. Next up, we have 2 bug types, being Sophocles' Charjabug and Tracy's Venonat. And in that order, both of these Pokemon had little screen time, but from what I've seen of them, they do have somewhat likeable personalities. And I mean, look at Venonat and how damn cute it is. Goldeen. From what I remember of this Pokemon, Misty was often dependent on it, and I also remember how it just used to float in the air, and honestly, to me, that's pretty funny. Brock's Forretress was another Pokemon that was often relied on, and when used, it showed just how strong it could be. However, because I hate Forretress, I admit, it did hold the Pokemon back. Next up is Silent Stunfisk. To me, this Pokemon has always had a funny design. And in the anime, Silent Stunfisk was also a funny Pokemon, so for that, I have fond memories of it. Brock's Vulpix is up next, and even though it wasn't in the anime for the longest amount of time, I still really liked it. This Pokemon was adorable, and it would have been a crime to give it hate. The next 2 Pokemon are owned by the same trainer, being Dawn. And the Pokemon are Ambipom and Quilava, and they're in this video in that order. Both of these Pokemon had big personalities when they were in the anime, and even though there are Pokemon I like more than them, they're still very well liked. Up next is a newer Pokemon from the Sun and Moon anime, and it is Kiawe's Marowak. Admittedly, I need to catch up on this region's anime series, but I have seen a lot of episodes so far, and the ones with this Pokemon in just show off how big a personality it is. I think it's just a likeable Pokemon. Tracy's Marill. This Pokemon had so much potential in the anime if Tracy stayed around longer, and despite its lack of appearances, I still remember this thing fondly. Maze Venusaur and Misty Starmie are up next, and in that order. Let's start with Venusaur. Before this Pokemon evolved, it was really memorable and adorable, and as for Starmie, it was often depended on by Misty before being dumped at Cerulean Gym. Silent Crustle, another powerful Pokemon and the one we'll be talking about next. This Pokemon did have some good story in the Gen 5 anime, and I remembered seeing it evolve and just thinking how awesome the Pokemon was. Up next is the Pika clone of Gen 7, aka Sophocles' Togedemaru. This thing has a funny personality, that's hard to deny, and that's just from what I've seen. When I catch up on the rest of the Alola anime, I know that I'm gonna get more laughs because of this Pokemon. Next, let's talk about 3 Pokemon, being Tracy's Cypher, Brock's Geodude, and Iris's Excadrill. And yes, in that order. All of these Pokemon were pretty powerful, and I like a mon that can give a hard hit. As for Cypher and Excadrill exclusively, I really liked their stories in the anime, even if they were somewhat similar. Anyway, all 3 were great Pokemon. Next up are 2 Water-type Pokemon, being Brock's Marshtomp and Misty's Gyarados. First off, Brock's Marshtomp was just adorable before it evolved, and even as a Marshtomp, it was pretty cool. As for Misty's Gyarados, not only was it memorable, but also fierce, and I really liked it. May's Beautifly and Dawn's Mamoswine. These Pokemon were on the more quiet side of their respected teams, but they truly showed off their capabilities when called upon in a battle or showcase. I just really like them, even if they weren't too loud like the other Pokemon, or like me. Next up, we have two Pokemon from the Gen 6 anime being Sylveon and Bunnelby, and in that order. I remember seeing the first previews of Serena's Eevee, and I knew that this thing had potential, and seeing it progress through the anime made me really like it. As for Bunnelby, this Pokemon was always dependable, and I liked its character in the series. Lana's Poplio. This thing is adorable, and honestly, it's just perfect as it is. I hope it never evolves. Next up, we have two Pokemon owned by May, being her Glaceon and Skitty. Both of these Pokemon were valuable members of May's team, who I adored. And if you don't like them, well, I don't think we can be friends. Brock's Ludicolo. The definition of a character transformation. This Pokemon went from being meh to very full of life, and in all stages I really liked it. Next up, we have two water types, being Misty's Horsey and May's Wartortle. Something these two have in common is that at one point in the anime, they were both babied a lot by their trainers. And with how adorable they both were, that's very understandable. I like them. Two more Pokemon I really like are Kiawe's Turtonator and Clement's Luxray. I loved both of these Pokemon before their anime appearances, so of course seeing them on screen made me like them even more. On top of that, they're both powerful as well, and as I said, I like strong Pokemon. Okay, so continuing with talking about two Pokemon at a time, next up we have the flying types Crobat and Togekiss, owned by Brock and Dawn. I feel like both of these Pokemon were really likeable. They were both somewhat calm, and it was nice that they weren't too in your face like other Pokemon, proving that a Pokemon can be quiet, yet still well liked. Misty Staryu is up next, and this Pokemon was one that was often relied on. Not only was it strong, but I'd also argue that it was one of Misty's most iconic Pokemon. Next up is Brock's Chansey, but you may know it better as Happiny. This thing was adorable in the anime, and on top of that, I really liked its funny moments, like when it would out of nowhere just lift boulders. What a great Pokemon! Iris's Emolga. This Pokemon was quite the personality on this Pokegirls team, and I liked whenever it would have its funny moments. If anyone had to catch this Pokemon, I'm glad it was Iris. Speaking of Pokemon with funny moments, next up is May's Munchlax. Ever since it first debuted, I loved this Pokemon. It was always hilarious and had such a big personality. Another Pokemon with a big personality was Dawn's Baneri. In the anime, this Pokemon was always one of Dawn's most dependent, and whenever it would crash over Pikachu, I would get a laugh out of that. I mean, I don't know why, but that was really funny to a younger me. Next up is Marlowe Zarina and Lily Snowy. Both Marlowe and Lily have just one Pokemon each, but they made good choices in their companions because both Pokemon are great personalities. They're both kind, and I've liked their appearances so far. Another two Pokemon I really like are Sudowoodo and Krogunk. Of course, two Pokemon owned by Brock, and yes, they're on this list in that order too. In the Sinnoh series, these were Brock's most relied on Pokemon, and both of them also had their funny moments as well. So for that, I love them. Misty's Corsola. This Pokemon is one that I feel often gets forgotten about, but being a big fan of the Johto anime, I remember this thing fondly. Corsola was cute, strong, and deserves much more love. Dawn's Pachirisu is another Pokemon I adore. This Chippy Chappy was always a laugh in the Sinnoh series, and its appearances would always make me happy. So fair to say, Pachirisu deserves to be so high up on this list. Next up, we have Silent's signature Pokemon, his Pansage. This grass type was often pretty calm, but at the same time, remained really likeable. Even though it was quite tame, I'm a fan of this Pokemon. One Pokemon that wasn't so tame was Iris's Dragonite. When this thing first debuted, it was a rogue Pokemon, and it maintained its personality for quite some time before settling down. It was powerful, a true monster, and I just adored it. Next up, we have Serena's other two team members being Pancham and Braixen. Although Serena's team lacked in quantity, the quality of her Pokemon was great. Pancham was a playful Pokemon and had a funny personality, whereas Braixen was a bit more reserved but still was really likeable. The Kalos anime nailed a lot of things with its series, but especially the character's Pokemon. We've just had Braixen, but another great fire type is Kiawe's Charizard. Kiawe might be better known for having his Turtonator, but in my opinion, I just prefer his Charizard. From what I've seen of it, this Pokemon is loyal, it's powerful, and I just really like it. Brock's Steelix. This is another well-known Pokemon that comes from the anime, and I'd argue that it's Brock's most iconic Pokemon. Not only is this thing strong, but it's truly progressed throughout the anime. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm a fan of this monster rock snake. Next up, we have two more Pokemon from Misty's squad, being her Politoed and Psyduck. And I can't exactly say in that order because it was too difficult to order them. Both of these Pokemon are very similar. They both seem a bit dumb and they're stupidly hilarious, and for that, I just love them. Clemens, Dedenne, and Chespin. They're up next, and of course in that order. Going back to what I said with Serena, I believe the Kalos series chose some great Pokemon for Ash's companions to capture. In the X and Y series, Chespin was always a laugh and a bit of a goofy Pokemon. Same with Dedenne. Clement captured Dedenne for Bonnie to look after, and this little fairy type was so adorable. Iris's Axew. This Pokemon was often babied around by everyone in the Unova group, and throughout the anime we truly saw this Pokemon progress. It went from being a crybaby to a Pokemon that could well and truly stand its ground. Axew was a well-developed character, and it's also one of my favourites. Next up, we have a Pokemon that broke my heart when it left its trainer. You know I'm talking about Togetic. This Pokemon was on Misty's team since it was a Togepi back in Kanto, and it was such a sweet and adorable Pokemon. So to see it later being released, man, that caught me in my feels. Maze Blaziken is in at the second place spot, and it really did deserve to be this high up. Fair to say, this Pokemon is May's most iconic, and not only is it powerful, but just like other Pokemon that are this high up, it had great development too. To keep it short, this is one awesome Pokemon. So finally, coming in at the number 1 ranking is Dawn's Piplup. Okay, so I grew up on Sinnoh and I loved the anime so much, and Piplup was a huge part of this series. Piplup was one of the funniest characters to ever brace the Pokemon anime, and it too had great character development. Overall, Piplup is just awesome and I love it. But anyway guys, with all that being said, that pretty much wraps things up for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more. Also, be sure to let me know which companion Pokemon you love down in the comments section. But with all that being said, for now, I've been PokeDan, you've been amazing, and I'll see you guys next time.